Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and thank you, as always, for choosing to spend your time with us today. For today's episode, I'm really excited to have Jake Joraanstad join me on the program. Now, I've known of Jake and followed the work by the team at Bushel for quite some time, and we finally crossed paths earlier this year. And our conversation then in person made it abundantly clear that if we're going to have conversations on this podcast that help agribusiness leaders get better at strategy execution and apply lessons from the broader world of business and how they grow their organizations, then the Bushel story and Jake's perspective need to be part of it. Now, I'm not going to front run the conversation, but as a preview, a few things that we did talk about is really going through the history of Bushel and all of the component parts of that story to focus on a few things, including picking a problem to solve and getting started, rethinking the barriers to tech adoption in ag, and where does the true barrier exist. We talked about Bushel's approach to that ever-present challenge of deciding whether to sell direct to grower or via a channel partner, which I know is something that everyone's always working through and has different positions and experiences with. We talk about the importance of looking outside of ag, and in Bushel's case, to banking, to help form a perspective on how you can create solutions to problems that accrue value to your customers while also growing the business that those customers do with you. And then we also take a forward look and dig into what some of the interesting use cases are for language-based AI models that are available today. And even more importantly, interestingly, what tomorrow's AI manifests through autonomy is going to mean for agriculture and the agricultural industry, both in terms of changes we can expect and the opportunities and value that it could unlock. A little bit about my guest today. Jake is the co-founder and CEO of Bushel, which is a software company powering grower transactions for more than 250 agribusinesses across more than 3,500 locations. Founded in 2017 and based in Fargo, North Dakota, Bushel is focused on bringing innovation and software products and solutions to the agricultural industry. A wonderful conversation. We ran out of time, which for me is always an indication that we had a good thing going. And so with that, here's my conversation with Jake Joraanstad of Bushel. Jake, good morning and welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Morning, Joe. Thanks for having me.
I'm happy this came together. We got a lot we want to talk about today. It's going to be a different episode compared to some of the other conversations we've had, which I'm excited about. But before we do that, for any listeners that maybe are not familiar with Bushel or know of Bushel but aren't intimately familiar with the business, why don't you talk about who Bushel is, what you all do, who you serve?
Yeah, so Bushel, we started our software company in 2017. We're purely a software business built for agriculture companies. So we spend our time and our efforts working with agribusinesses, working with co-ops, retailers around the country to deliver great software that helps them do business with their farmers. Think about our tools. They're customer portals. They are tools for online payments. They're tools for signing grain contracts and making offers online, but it's all built around this white labeled experience for the agribusiness. So you can call us up and say, hey, we're a co-op down here in Texas, and we want to be able to provide a better set of tools for our farmer to do business with us online. And we'll come in and provide those tools, do the integration with your ERP and accounting platform, and make it easy for farmers to self-serve. And the whole thing started in 2017 with this idea that the paper scale ticket needed to go away and farmers should have an easier place to come online and basically self-serve those grain deliveries. That is now expanded into a sort of a multi-dimensional platform for these agribusinesses.
So it started with the scale ticket, which for anyone who's ever delivered to a grain elevator, worked at a grain elevator, settled contracts on behalf of a grain elevator, that is obviously a huge pain point. I'm imagining it also helps growers managing their splits, managing contract fulfillment. Does it also help with position management, their grain contracting and marketing efforts? Has it extended in those aspects as well?
Yeah, all of the above. Think about, when you're busy in harvest, just the idea that every delivery you're making is showing up on your phone or online to be able to double check what you've done for the day. what's been applied to a contract, maybe what's unsold. We have, commodity balances like open storage and price later. You can understand better, the amount of farmers who just miss the little things in harvest, it's pretty significant. And so we make it easier with these tools. And so they know where they stand. Same for commercials. If you're a commercial grain company selling into some of these major players that might be on our platform, you can also use our tools to keep track of your positions and all that. And of course, as we evolved the platform over the years from early adoption and getting farmers just to use these tools to understand their business, they eventually ask things like, well, why can't I just sign my contract here or actually make an offer? And of course, those things evolved. So all of those are available today on these tools.
That's great. And not to belabor the point here, but I think it's fascinating to get into the breadcrumbs of some of these businesses that start with I guess in the retelling, it's also very simple and straightforward, but I'm guessing it was messy at the time. But this idea of the paper scale ticket needs to go away. What can you share around how you arrived at that being the entry point, right? Saying this is the particular, I'm presuming it's a pain point for the grower, for the doing business with the co-op or the originator of the grain, whatever it might be. How did you arrive at saying that's the problem we're going to solve? And then we'll just iterate and extend from there.
There's some combination of getting lucky, being quite ignorant in some respects about the whole problem of the space, and then starting somewhere. Our first customer, before we were a product company, we had been building custom software, and we were working with sugar beet co-ops up here in North Dakota, Minnesota, and we had helped them build this sort of mobile app experience for the sugar beet grower to understand their deliveries and loads and all that. And when we saw the adoption skyrocket of farmers who are ready to use tools like that, it was very obvious that this idea of how many loads did I deliver, et cetera, that was a really important part of the equation. But we realized also that sugar beets are just a part of overall agriculture here in the U.S. And so we went after the realization, we kind of came up with this idea that while the grain industry is much bigger, much more interesting, and they have the same problem. All these loads and deliveries. We all grew up on the farm delivering, with the grain truck. And we said, let's go after that. Now, the ignorant part was we didn't understand the complexity of how many different ERP and scale systems existed in ag to start. So we went after this problem just completely unaware of the challenge that we had ahead of us. So we started with one company and 2 and 5 and 10. And today we work with over 260 facilities or 260 companies and 3,500 facilities, US and Canada. But that journey to make our system work across the variety of systems that companies run in ag, and certainly many of them are very much older technology stacks, was a humongous effort to get where we are today. So it's been a interesting journey to get there, but we started somewhere with a simple problem. Maybe you could call it a point solution, you could call it. And now it's become a proper platform that serves a whole part of the business.
This is going to romanticize it a little bit, but it's almost the value of ignorance, right? Had you known how hard it would be, you might have overcomplicated at the front end or frankly not gotten started there. And so,
you wouldn't have done it. There would not be a logical argument at first to do this. You would have thought of a million different things that might have been a little bit easier to deal with instead. But part of why we're still here today is because we created this moat where there's not a lot of competitors in this space because it's a challenging problem to go after at scale. And so getting to scale was really important. But once you're there, you have a moat.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you've probably also, in terms of timing, it coincides well with a secular shift across agribusiness where, my read of it is that the large incumbents have moved off of the prior assumption that you had to build proprietary solutions to interact with your growers. And, I spent many, many years at Cargill. In those early days, everything was built in-house, right? You weren't going externally for solutions that might also be solutions that your competitors that would also be leveraging. But I think the SaaS evolution and revolution and just generally looking for expert third-party service providers, I think you fit into that timing and that shift very, very well. There's more appetite for that now than there perhaps was certainly 15 or 20 years ago.
Totally. One of the earliest pushbacks was, well, we want a different app than the competitor. And the question you had to really ask eventually was, what part needs to be different because you're not a technology company. The grain co or the retailer is not the technology company. Your advantages are not going to be whether your button is blue, green, up in the corner or down at the bottom. That's not going to be the difference for why a farmer chooses to do business with you. And that can actually give you a list of the reasons why they do choose to do business with you. Convenience is one of them. Actually, yes. Convenience is one of the most important factors for why a farmer does business with anybody. And so if you choose to be different for the sake of being different, you become less convenient than what might be considered a standard product and offering like what we have at Bushel, where now farmers are annoyed that they have to use a different set of tools to do business with you, but they can do something that's familiar to them with the others. And I'm not suggesting that we're trying to solve a marketplace one-size-fits-all bucket, but the things we do are things that everybody does, tickets and contracts. Your price is what differentiates you. Your convenience of how fast you can dump, the people that you work with in your farmer. Those are how you win business in the arena, and obviously your physical assets themselves in the grain business, but not whether your buttons are different colors than the competitor.
Yep, absolutely. Well, something you said interesting at the beginning there was seeing the huge adoption rate and sort of the traction and takeoff from growers that were using the tool. And one of the most prolific tropes, I would say, in ag and agribusiness is that growers are reluctant adopters of technology. And this is a leading question because you and I met finally at an event earlier this year up in Minnesota, and I heard you talk about this. But so people, there's this presumption that the grower is the barrier to adoption, right? For a variety of reasons. Cost, they don't understand it. They're just somehow, physiologically opposed to it. But what has been your experience in technology adoption in the business, and specifically, where are the adoption bottlenecks? Why do we see businesses run into headwinds when it comes to actually folks picking up and using that technology solution that they're providing?
So I think it was true at some time in the past that farmers' willingness to try technologies, and particularly in software, let's call it 2010 to 2015 timeframe in particular, that was a challenging time where everybody was trying to build different software tools, but farmers weren't necessarily willing to buy and pay for. I would say looking back with some, 2020 vision, one, there wasn't a lot of value added for those. Those tools weren't actually providing value, and they were charging the farmer sometimes crazy, pricing structures per acre type of costing and all these challenges. And so the first, cycle of software and technology in ag, in particular on the software piece, happened in that time frame, and it was maybe challenging. But if you think about current state and even prior, in the 90s, when the technology is clearly an ROI for the farmer, when it's, auto steer, for example, the adoption curve goes from, early adopter to majority adopted very quickly. And what I would make the case of today is sitting here in 25, and I would have said this really in 2021, 2022 was very obvious as well. The farmer is no longer the barrier for adoption. They are willing to try tools that will clearly provide value or are perceived to provide value to them and their farm. And you're talking more than 50%, more than 70%, sometimes 90+% of the farmers in our customers' area are using these tools. And they're not resisting it. They're not scared of it. They almost all have the tools in their hands already, whether they have an iPhone or an iPad or whatever they've got. This is already there. And so what we think now, the real challenge is actually that the adoption of technology inside the agribusiness in the middle of the supply chain is where the barriers are. We can show you one facility who has 80, 90% of their grower base adopting a set of tools. In the same company, different facility, like literally maybe a couple hundred miles away, getting 10 or 20% of their farmers adopted on a tool. And you could say, oh, maybe they have a bunch of old farmers there. No, that's not the argument. What's happening is your management team at that facility is not interested in changing how they do business, and it affects the farmer's ability and willingness to change as well. And so what we're realizing is at this point, it's not the farmer, it's the agribusiness that needs to think hard about their change management because the farmer's ready for it.
Are you seeing a different level of say, transaction volume or value with growers, with those local businesses that are actually advocating for the solutions and getting their growers on the solutions, is the actual share of wallet, if you will, with those growers increasing?
Yes, almost certainly, and almost in all cases, you will buy more grain, conduct more transactions with the farmers you're doing business with the next year and the following if you're doing a good job getting adoption. Almost in every case. Some of our customers are seeing 10, 15% origination growth a year into some of these tools. And so it's telling me that the farmer's ready. Convenience, software, if done really well, and certainly because this part of the tools, we don't charge the farmer, the facility's buying these software from us. If done well and it's free to the farmer and the ROI is clear, the adoption curve is very obvious. It's like immediate, hey, we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% by number. And typically it's an 80-20 rule. So your farmers who do the most business with you are usually also the ones most likely to get these tools to make it, again, convenient to do business with you. And that convenience wins out a lot of days.
So it's almost this inverse of what the instinct might be for a reluctant management team member to say, okay, let's pilot this with some of our smaller, less strategic customers, because if it doesn't work, then we're not going to burn our relationship capital with them. But in fact, those are not the right test cases. Based on what you just said, you would actually want to be piloting it, taking that risk, if you will, with your most valuable, your highest potential, your highest value growers, because that's where the hockey stick adoption will occur and the most value will accrue then to the agribusiness.
Yes. You just think about it in a basic sense. If you've got a farmer who just does business a little bit every year with you, they've got an account, you count them as a customer, but they make 2, 3, 4 deliveries to your facility. The convenience factor for them isn't so important because that's clearly not the main place that they're doing deliveries, or they're a small operation. And so they can deal with the 2, 3, or 4 paper tickets and the phone calls they got to make a year.
Yep.
But the guys that you work with that make all their deliveries there, that if you really have surrounded them with, they're your customer, those are the ones who need the convenience because they are dealing with a lot of volume. And if they can get it in a singular place for you, with you, the outcomes are better for that farmer. And that's where you see that 80-20 rule play out all the time.
Sure. So you said something interesting there, and I want to dig into it. You talked about where the allocation of cost is. And so you're not selling the solution to the grower, you're selling it to the agribusiness, to the co-op, to the grain company, to whoever that counterparty is. In nearly all the projects that we work on from an M&A perspective, not all, but many of our projects require us to help our clients reconcile direct versus channel distribution challenges. So you might have an acquiring company that traditionally has been direct to grower, and they buy a company that sells via channel, or vice versa, right? We've worked on this on both ends, and it's in seed, it's in fertilizer and crop fertility manufacturing, it's in grain origination. We have some folks that have grower relationships, some folks that build relationships with third-party grain marketers that have a network of growers. And so it's always this conundrum. And I'm getting the sense that it played out here in the tech space as well. Your solution is direct value add to the grower, indirect value add to the grain aggregator via bigger business with those growers. But you chose to allocate the cost, basically charging the agribusiness. What's the history behind that decision? Is that where you started? What have you learned along the way to say, okay, look, we're going to sell the solution to the aggregator and then provide it sort of, at no cost to the grower?
Well, I think it started with looking at consumer trends. And the early example we always used was banking tools. If you do business with the bank, they don't charge you to make it more convenient by using their online portal or their mobile app to do deposits. Actually, they'd prefer you do that because it saves the bank time, money, and tellers to do the same transaction with you as they would have had to do manually before. And so they actually started charging for the manual side of the business to get people to move to the digital front, because there's a true direct benefit in reducing overhead, labor, in the amount of times you're looking up a customer account or making a transfer, all these reasons why the banks all moved to these online experiences. So we went from the teller and the ATM to online portal and mobile app and everything self-service. And I mean, you could argue that half the banks in the country don't need to exist in terms of physical locations at this point. I mean, the transition has been incredible. That's different in ag because there's a physical product we're dealing with. So there's no risk of your facility having to disappear because you need that in order to do business. But the same concept applied. We said, hey, our first conversations, it was funny because they either said, well, can you just charge the farmer? And our view was, you're not going to get any farmers to pay to do business with you that way. That's not a good argument. And then the second one was, well, can we price per farmer user? Because if farmers don't adopt it, we don't want to pay for it. And so, of course, some of our early contracts included pricing per user because that's what they wanted. But as soon as the user count started skyrocketing, then they're like, well, we want to get a fixed contract. We want to know what we're going to pay for. And the whole conversation changed. But the whole point was you had to flip the model. The assumption that you'd pay for software as a facility to make it convenient for your farmer was a challenging one because that was not necessarily the way people thought about it. But it's the same reason why we think facilities should make farmers pay to get the traditional paper check, and it should be free to do an ACH transaction, for example, to the farmer. Because in the end, your physical labor, your internal inefficiencies are so significant compared to the convenience of making it available to the farmer on their own that it's a no-brainer. And over time, that's been true. That's why we have a business today. But in the early days, to your point, there was this battle of like, should we charge the farmer? Can we charge our members? We always said, we don't think you should, but you can do what you want. And to a T, 100%, nobody has charged their farmer for these tools.
So that was a position you all started from,
yes,
based on your read of consumer trends. It wasn't a position that you worked yourself into.
And we believed from the beginning, the first thing we did when we started Bushel was we believed that selling software to a farmer was a difficult thing to begin with. And if there was a business that could have the software and provide it to the farmer, then you could increase the happiness and engagement from the farmer. You'd win the business over from an efficiency standpoint, and everybody wins. That was our approach from the beginning. We didn't think selling software to the farmer was the answer. And if you remember kind of this agtech version 1.0, everybody was trying to sell something to the farmer and by acre. And those were very challenging business models. And so we just saw that happen already, and we decided not to do that here.
Well, I think it comes back to that earlier discussion we had around adoption, because you had said, you'd made the point that some of the solutions being offered perhaps didn't have the value. They were mispriced, meaning charging too much to the producer. And then when that sort of comes together with the not just being a mispriced solution, but the misallocation of that cost to the wrong participant in the value chain, you actually do create the barriers to adoption, which then we subsequently blame the grower, which we talked about here is probably not the right case. Is that still today a challenge with new companies, new clients, new customers as you bring them on, to help them understand that a fixed price contract, the availability of the solution is going to grow your engagement with your existing growers, it's going to extend the business? Is that still a challenge, or are you finding more people come in the door convinced or easily convinced that they are the proper payers of the solution, and that it's the model you're proposing?
It's a rare conversation that we have. It's rare when somebody thinks that this is not something they want to provide. Nowadays, it's more of, who should be the providers at Bushel, or maybe somebody else, or could they do it themselves if they're a major company? They always think that they can build these tools. Generally has not been successful. The conversation used to be that. It has not been that in a long time. I think it's almost table stakes now to have a good experience this way in order to compete particularly if you're an originator. There's a lot of arguments as to why the commercial side shouldn't be so convenient, because in reality, you want to buy more from the farmers. So let's not make it too easy for all these commercial suppliers to provide to us, because it's cheaper for us to buy direct. But beyond that part of the conversation, it's table stakes. You are a late adopter at this point if you don't have a good tool set in front of your farmer. That's kind of where the industry is right now. Certainly, we're in the early to mid, maybe late majority adoption already, and the only thing left might be late majority and the proper late adopters left in this sort of adoption cycle.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
One last question on this, and this is sort of just testing an idea I've had, is, a lot of the leading tech solutions, both in ag and outside of ag, have owned the strategy of white label, which allows your customers to still brand the solution, put their name at the top or at the bottom, wherever they want it, to your point. The tech solution is standardized. They get to brand it. It's a white label solution that's provided to them. Was that something that you also had to be convinced of, or was that a concession easily made at the beginning? And really, what's the durability of the value of white labeling? Because at some point, I would imagine we'll get to a marketplace where growers know simply by the configuration of how they're transacting with the co-op whether or not they're using Bushel. And at some point, they just need to know from a drop-down menu, which co-op did I deliver this grain to so I can settle this particular contract? Is that a durable value for your customers to have it white label, or is it just a concession at this point?
I think it's a no-brainer why we are here, and white label has been the solution. Let me tell you, the only people who thought we were crazy about white labeling everything for our customers' experience were people who were investing in marketplaces that have since come and gone. They were this investor type that said, well, why don't you just build a marketplace? Why would you build these solutions the way you are with serving each customer? Well, first off, the integration is with the customer. It's the customer's data. It's their systems to serve their farmers. There's nothing to debate in my mind there. This is the solution for our customer and their farmer. That's how we think about delivering the product. The only people who disagreed were investors in the early days who were not investors of Bushel, but maybe they did these other marketplaces, like I said, have since come and gone, lost most of their money, to then realize that Bushel's model at the beginning was the right one. And you can go look across the market, everybody has copied our model. And the reason is because you just fundamentally, at like a very first principles idea, like nobody's going to pay for software that integrates with their proprietary data and then displays it in a marketplace. That would be just a very challenging idea altogether. Now, that all being said, there is a convenience for the farmer that does a lot of business with a lot of our customers, where they might want to get access to all their transactions in one place. But we always viewed that as a separate problem from being able to have the convenience factor of doing business with, say, school or whichever company it may be that you work with. And so when we bought Farm Logs in 2021, our strategy with this, what became Bushel Farm, was a farmer-facing set of tools that the farmer would be able to connect their accounts and pull all their transaction data into that single place to understand their own farm, but not for marketplace purposes, not for competitive reasons, but just I want to see where my overall farm position is. And Bushel happens to have a lot of the companies I work with. Let's make that convenient. But there's a line drawn there where we're not creating a marketplace. We're not creating this sort of competitive bidding environment or anything like it. We don't even sell bid data of our customers. We don't sell that data to other people. Most other players do. They take your data, they ingest it, they make you pay for it, and then they sell it to somebody else. Bushel doesn't do that either. And so we've always had this view, and thankfully we're right, but I don't think it was that hard. I just never understood why people thought we were crazy to do white label, but it's a no-brainer. I just don't understand the argument at all at this point.
Well, and what's interesting too is I think back, we're recording this here in early 2025, and so this is roughly 8-10 years ago, and we talk about the emerging threat to the incumbents at the time was the disintermediation of the ag supply chain.
Yes, and that somehow these virtual elevators were going to appear everywhere, and
yes,
we were going to transport grain with zappers from one side of the country to the other through teleportation. I don't know what the plan was.
Exactly, and all of the country elevators, never mind the terminals, just the country elevators that had for 100 years or more been a place to provide access to the grower to domestic and global marketplaces, right? So someone had to handle that grain. It was this really sort of looking at that middleman as being a non-value add, value scalping, value extracting element of the value chain. And we're going to move away from it. And what's interesting is the successful tech companies that have actually found success and traction haven't disrupted the traditional ag value chain as much as they've sort of improved the plumbing and removed the friction in the transactions in many ways. And so, yes, we're going to see continued loss of some of the smaller country elevators. Farms are getting bigger, production's up and to the right, the ability to haul it longer distances. It's fewer grain wagons going to town. That secular trend is there. But underlying it, there's still going to be the need for the middleman. And actually, the value is in enabling the legacy supply chain to work more efficiently than trying to blow it up and own what's left when the dust settles.
Yeah, I think natural consolidation is sort of an obvious path that we've been on in the co-op space, for example. But this idea that these are just simply things that need to be turned on and off with some future marketplace, I think just doesn't make a lot of sense. And now you're right. The farmers that are getting bigger, there's facilities on the farm that are bigger than country elevators facilities in some cases, right? And so that's a convenience. Very few of them are on the rail. Very few of them are on a logistical position that makes sense. So that's why these facilities still exist. I would say there's the consolidation happening. The other thing that people don't understand, and your podcast does, but a lot of people outside of ag don't understand, that 80% of our grain, for example, in the basically feed, fuel, food, is being purchased out in what we call the country elevator sort of network. And the idea, like everybody thinks that Cargill and ADM buy 50% of the product in the country, but they might process or touch that much in terms of trading. But in terms of acquiring the product from the country, it's 80% small facilities all over the US. And so I think people totally miss that part of the equation. They just assume the ABCDs are doing everything. And the reality is they're actually buying very little directly from the farm. And the farm is reliant on this extended network of country elevators, for example. So people just don't understand that outside of ag, I think. And most investors I've talked to in the years past have asked me, well, if ADM and Cargill own 50% of the market, how can there be an interesting market here for you? And so they just don't understand how this works.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if you measure grain handle by point of export or point of processing, then those numbers do look quite different. They do look heavily concentrated, but the initial origination off the field, it touches a lot of elevators, touches a lot of hands.
Right, and that's before we start talking about the feed market and the the fuels market. That's a very simplistic view to think that the ABCDs own the whole market, because that's just not a true statement.
Well, Jake, let's shift gears to something I know you're pretty passionate about. I heard you speak about this again earlier this year at an event that we were at. You subsequently have talked about artificial intelligence and in an NGFA event here not too long ago. But before I ask the question, in this podcast, we've only adjacently even sort of commented on artificial intelligence and the proliferation of LLMs or large language models and reasoning models that, back to late 2022, that's sort of been the what's been headline news, right? But having you with us today, I want to kind of hit this head on. As you look at artificial intelligence in all its many forms, and I would like us to actually talk about its many different forms, because I think that's beneficial to our listeners. But as you look at AI and ag, where do the breadcrumbs take us back to, and where do you think we are headed in terms of interesting use cases, potential impacts, the opportunities, and frankly, the things that agribusiness operators need to be thinking about, both as threats and opportunities to their businesses?
Yeah, so I think that there's let's just maybe keep it simple. There's two areas right now that are changing quickly that will impact us in agribusiness going forward. One is everybody's maybe most familiar with right now is language models, this idea that you can give ChatGPT or Grok or some other model a set of your information and it can comprehend it better than it's almost always surprising how good it is now and can get you outputs. Let me give you an example. We're using Google's AI tools internally here at Bushel to make our software developers better, but we're also applying it to our customer CRM data and giving them executive summaries on a weekly basis about the conversations their teams are having with their farmers. Hey, they view us as the agronomy experts and they're looking for these kinds of products to, hey, $4.30 gets deals done in corn. Those realizations that you could give in a weekly update to somebody that would normally require them to filter through hundreds or thousands of notes, pretty incredibly useful way to use a language model that can comprehend human writing and notes and context and apply it to some sort of summary. That's where we've seen interesting use cases so far. There's a lot to be done. So I would say if you were to use a language model today, like ChatGPT's latest or Grok or somebody, the challenge in agriculture is so reliant on current markets and current events that it's challenging to get it to be insightful. It doesn't, ChatGPT, for example, almost never can comprehend the current price of corn. And that's just like a basic thing, but it can't do it because they're not hooked up to the internet directly in the sense that they're using real-time data. Grok, on the other hand, can go find the price of corn and then put that into its context of maybe an answer it's going to give you. So those things will be solved. But right now, if you go to try to get it to teach you how to do better grain marketing right now, it's a little bit hairy because it doesn't really think about real time and current events. That's an interesting problem that will be resolved pretty quickly, I'm sure. But you'd have to build a model that includes all current pricing in order to really be useful. Now, you can run your own models internally. I think the most advanced trading houses in the country have been doing this for a while. They're ingesting as much information as possible into these models and trying to get outcomes. Where language models and even just broader sort of AI general models get really helpful is when the amount of information required to understand a situation is more than humans are good at taking in. You can give it virtually an unlimited amount of input. Hey, this earthquake here, crop drought here, price of grain here. You can do all these inputs and it will comprehend it with more accuracy than any one human can do. And so you'd think that eventually there's going to be this co-pilot for the grain marketer, a co-pilot for the retailer on pricing that's going to come. We're not there yet, but that's where those use cases are super helpful. And I see those being labor multipliers in the sense of like your team can do more business with more people and more companies and more farmers with the same amount of people or even less than was required before. And we're going to be better at our jobs because we're going to know more and comprehend more of what's happening around our business than we did before. You could imagine just an executive team in the very near future being able to simply go into their dashboard and instead of scrolling through spreadsheets and graphs, you can just simply say, how are we doing today compared to last week? And this model will be able to talk about your position report. It'll be able to talk about how you're doing in terms of quantity of buys. How are we doing in terms of price? Are we making more money or less money? Let's just give you the answer to how your business is doing. That's coming. I would say you could theoretically do that today, but those are things that are coming in this, what we call language model or general models in AI. So I'll pause there because I think there's another side we should talk about too, more around autonomy.
Yeah. So one of the things you said there was really interesting. I want to go back to the very beginning. Well, frankly, everything you said there was very interesting, Jake. But back at the very beginning, you talked about this use case of almost having an AI agent, if you will, scraping salespeople's notes in the CRM to generate an executive summary that's then provided to some group of managers or management team, et cetera, to derive insights that previously would have taken a huge amount of time, been subject to all sort of subjective bias of what do you value in the notes, and are you looking at everyone's notes equally? You're writing off one person because you don't think they're very competent at their job. You're overvaluing the inputs of somebody else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's one of those interesting use cases. And for folks that are listening, before we get into the second half of this on autonomy, I think it's really important that we all hit reset when we think about AI use cases in our business. When I talk with our clients and the topic of AI comes up, there is a general sense of we know we need to be using AI in our business and we're not sure where to use it. And I think that is a lens through which you're always going to get stuck. If you're sitting there saying, I need to use AI, where do I use it? You likely will miss the opportunities. Well, a better framing is, I've got a tough task in front of me. Someone asked a really good question. I'm trying to figure out how to get the answer. Could AI help me with this? The example is, oh gosh, we know there's a lot of notes have been put into our CRM over the last 90 days. We would like to have someone go through and aggregate those notes and synthesize them and do a thematic analysis and tell us what the 3 most important messages are out of those notes. That's a perfect time to say, oh wait, could AI help us?
Not only could AI do it, but it will do it. It will do it in 10 seconds.
Exactly.
And it will blow your mind. And so that is like hey, let's make a whole project about this, to here's an outcome. I got it 10 seconds later, and I generated a 2-page document to review. It's that huge increase in productivity that happened right there. That used to be 2 or 3 people reading through everything, going to here. But let me just say, sorry to cut you off on the story, but here's something that's super important. If you back up to what I would describe as current state in agribusiness today, I would argue most companies in agribusiness today do not even have a centralized concept of a CRM. Most, as in more than 50%. And not only do they not have a centralized tool like a Bushel CRM or even a Salesforce or something like it, but they don't even have it in digital form. And so it couldn't even be produced into a model or to be led into a ChatGPT to get you answers. So we are currently talking about a great idea that I can do with some customers, but most customers today haven't even moved from the sticky notes on the desk and the knowledge of that farming relationship in the head of the originator or the agronomist. And so that, if you want to do something about your company today and make a change, it is to get your team to put this information into a form that is digital and able to be recalled in the future with technology, because then we can start to apply use cases that make sense. If you have no history, if you have no notes that are accessible, if you have no way to do this, there's nothing to talk about. You can't use AI for anything unique to your business, except for to ask it generic questions like, make me a Christmas card. Okay. And so there's a lot to be had if you could just move into a digital space for your company.
I mean, well said. I mean, it's kind of like, you have all these AI tools that are available at very marginal cost with high utility if you've got the data. But if you don't have the data centralized and collected, you've got the lever without the fulcrum, providing zero leverage. And it's not going to do a whole lot for your business.
Now, the thing is, most of the agribusiness tooling today on the technology front is also in a place that's not accessible to these capabilities. Like, you've got old systems that you can't even get the information out of. If you've ever been a part of a Salesforce project in ag, you'll know how hard it is to get data out of X, Y, or Z ERP. So companies like Bushel, one of our specialties is getting data out of a system that you run every day in the core system and putting it into a cloud model that delivers value to your farmer, but also back to your team, where you can access this data now outside of the office, on the fly, on the farm, and recall it quickly. And now you start taking notes against the profile. We not only know the profile, but we know the notes and the history with that farmer. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, the model can start to do things like, here's a perfect example. Our CRM today, you can type in a phone number and that customer account just pulls up on the fly. So somebody's calling you, you type in the number quick. Okay, I've got Farmer John up. Here's his profile. But if we do this right, we will summarize the entire history of that account, all the recent notes, and the AI could just simply suggest, hey, don't forget to talk to Farmer John about his last year's corn and his willingness to sell at $4.30. That could be a conclusion that AI could make at the very top of that profile for a suggestion of what to talk about when this guy calls you. Yep. And it can be based almost completely on facts that you have collected over the last 6 months. And it might even know exactly how much corn this guy probably has in his bin based on little nuanced notes that you've taken. It could do the math for you. That's an incredible storyline versus, hey, I've got a bunch of sticky notes. I'm trying to understand what this guy's called me about.
Well, and I think it shines a light on the, you sort of 10x your originators and your grain buyers and your merchandisers, as opposed to the idea that, well, this is going to somehow digitize our origination team and suddenly we're not going to have grain buyers. It's net, it's a threat to everybody's jobs. It's actually, no, this is an accelerant for the business when used properly. But let's get to the autonomy point that I know you want to talk about too, as we look at running at the end of the hour here.
Yeah. So this other piece is super important, has nothing to do with my business at Bushel and the software industry per se. But I am convinced that we need to be ready for what autonomous on-road, over-the-road vehicles and autonomous applicators and autonomous facilities will look like in the near future. One of the biggest challenges with autonomous vehicles and why we haven't seen mass adoption is the same problem as to why we didn't see language models become useful until just a few years ago. The same technology behind it, this concept of a transformer and how we learn by giving something information and a model can be created to make this language model, is being applied in robotics and autonomy using visual input. So basically a lot of recorded video is how Tesla is training their car fleet to drive itself. I have a 2020 Tesla, 5-year-old Tesla, that literally drives me to my chiropractor appointment and home without me doing anything. And it's a 5-year-old car because they've been able to build a model, compress it down to old hardware that runs on my car, and my car drives me. So if it can do it in my old Tesla, for certain, the semi-truck of the future is going to be autonomous. And so if a semi-truck is 10 times safer, fully autonomous, and capable of getting to a farm and getting back to your facility, that probably means you need to own a fleet of trucks in the future, because the farmer is going to have less and less reasons to have the fleet of trucks they have when these trucks can come on demand at any time, no matter if your labor is available or not, if people have had enough rest or not. There will not be a 10-hour workday rule for trucks when they have no people in them. That will change rural American agriculture. And I'm not saying that all your trucking jobs are going to go away, because you're going to have people managing 2, 3, or 4 trucks, through technology and tools. But we already have a problem with labor, especially during harvest, to get enough vehicles on the road and out. We have way more than enough trucks. We don't have enough people. That's always the problem.
Yep.
And so that change, along with applying that same capability to getting your applicator out to the farm operation on time, completely autonomously. Maybe it loads itself on the truck and drives there. Maybe it drives itself down the highway and gets to the next farm. That shift is coming faster than we realize. And we've been waiting for it for 15, 20, 30 years, because this idea that auto steer happened felt like, well, why can't it just drive itself? Well, auto steer, when we look back someday, it is so rudimentary compared to what a vehicle that can make decisions based on what it's viewing in front of it and drive around the deer that's standing in the road and get onto the field by hitting the correct approach that doesn't look muddy. Auto steer can't do any of those things because it doesn't comprehend what's happening around it. But my little old Tesla does comprehend that. And my Tesla's coal powered, by the way. So if you're offended at all on the energy side, we just fill it full of electricity from coal here in North Dakota. Got no problem with that. Big fan. I also have an ethanol powered race car. So I'm a kind of all energy kind of guy. So this is going to happen at the semi-fleet level. It's going to happen in your facility. This idea of the arm coming down and taking tests at the scale, and this problem of, wow, it can't really do it itself. So we have people behind the controls still doing it today to grab multiple places. 100% going to be autonomous everywhere. The lights out facility of the future is coming, where you won't need people at each elevator to really run the operation. It will know when a farmer's about to make a mistake and dump the wrong product. And these things are coming quickly. And so I think generally for the better. We already have a labor problem in ag. And I think if we can reduce the challenge of labor by having more tools do more of the job, I think our businesses will have increased margin. We won't have as big of a labor challenge. And it will probably, in the end, be more convenient for everybody. So that's what I think is happening in the next 5 or 10 years.
No, I think that's a good look forward. And I mean, again, These are problems that actually address labor challenges, not create threats to labor. To your point, and I would say there's enough trucks, there's probably enough drivers net within the United States, but it's not evenly distributed. So we work with clients in certain parts of West Central Kansas where you can get trucks all day long. But then certain times of the year, try to originate bushels off the farm in southern Indiana, and good luck, because those trucks are all running from the neighbor's farm, from the farmer-owned vehicles running it to the elevator on their own behalf. And so I think you think about the fact that we already are looking at a challenging labor environment, a shrinking rural population, an aging rural population, labor constraints, labor cost constraints. And then on the other side, those jobs that remain that are likely more balanced relative to the people available to do them are more pleasant. So if trucks can be delivering into the ethanol plant between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. to keep the grind going and not bothering anybody, not keeping a parent away from their kids, not forcing someone to work third shift and then come home and get their kids out of bed and get them off to school, and all the sacrifices we make, it is actually a benefit, and it's an opportunity to get ahead of it and think about how is this going to fix a pre-existing problem, again, that labor and cost problem, but then also create more attractive career opportunities within our industry.
The biggest challenge that everybody has is a gut reaction that this is bad for my job as a truck driver. But I would put to you that the reason some truck drivers own 2 or 3 trucks is because they see opportunity to serve it more. The future is you will own not 1 truck, but you'll own 3 that drive themselves. And you'll be at home monitoring your small fleet that is making you money while you spend time dealing with other things going on in your life, spend time with your family, and these things will do the work overnight for you and only alert you when you really need to figure out if they've been blown tire or something like this. You got to go service the truck. But the future job is a better job, and it might even make you more money. And so I think that's where we're going.
That's a great way to close it out today, Jake. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Joe. I enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully your listeners do too.
I'm sure they will. And we'll make sure we have links to Bushel in the show notes so folks can check you all out. And also we'll have your LinkedIn profile linked there as well so folks can follow you and see what you're up to. So thanks again for joining us. And to our listeners, thank you as always for tuning in to today's episode of the Pacesetter Pod. A very quick reminder to subscribe to the podcast and to continue the conversation. You can always find me on LinkedIn or check out the links in the show notes to set up a call if you need to talk about how we can help your business execute strategy better and grow. I look forward to having you join us again next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.